What you are looking at is a Google Earth picture of Fontana Lake. Today, we are not going to be traveling anywhere per se. Instead, for this episode, you will be treated to a photo essay of a long gone town now buried beneath the waters of this lake you are looking at. Yes, there were a few of those kinds of towns in Swain County. For this episode, however, we will have to travel a bit southward down this lake. The town to be discussed for this episode, well, it is reported to have been located around the area of where Alarka Creek meets the Little Tennessee River. My guess, someplace near this area right here, as identified on this map. And what did the town look like, might you ask? Well, this is it right here. And what town was it, might you ask? Well, it was none other than Judson, one of the more important North Shore towns. Though located a bit southward than most of the other so-called North Shore towns, the town of Judson was in fact situated on either side of the Little Tennessee River, about 2.5 miles southeast of what is today another submerged town, Bushnell, and about 2 miles north of Almond. Most buildings in Judson were on the east bank of the river, which was connected by a bridge to the Southern Railway, which ran along the west bank. Judson, it was a small farming community that flourished briefly during the 1910s and 20s, when the Whiting Manufacturing Company built a band mill and other facilities nearby. Before we delve further into that, however, why don't we first delve into even earlier history? As with many other regions in this stretch of North Carolina, the Cherokee Indians were at one time incredibly prominent. In fact, the earliest history of this area denotes the presence of Cherokee settlements having been present in what would come to be the Alarka vicinity as early as the 1840s. In the late 19th century, there is clearly documented evidence of such settlements having been located near the Judson vicinity. Many of these so-called Nantahala Cherokees had ties with outlying settlements, including some distance to the west in the Ducktown Basin of East Tennessee. Now, let me turn your attention to this dissertation. Being Cherokee in a white world, ethnic identity in a post-removal American Indian enclave. And in it, it says the following. In 1898, the names of 17 families, 82 people, appear on a community census of the Nantahala Indians, conducted by the tribe. Most members of this enclave that year were kin or former neighbors of the Ducktown Basin Cherokees. However, by the early 1900s, many of the Cherokees were apparently gone from the area, with some moving to the newly purchased 3,200-acre tract near Elah. At least a small enclave did reportedly remain in the general vicinity, possibly being closer to Almond, which in itself is not all that far from Judson. I mean, both are considered Nantahala-centric communities, more or less. Yes, the river flowing past Almond in this photo, it is the Nantahala. And Alarka Creek, if you do not know, enters on the east side of the Little Tennessee, opposite of where the Nantahala enters. In the late 1800s, possibly in the early 1880s, a road had been built west from Judson along the south bank of the Little Tennessee, as far west as Panther Creek. This would later become the Judson-Japan Road, the main road that led from Judson to Japan, which is actually how it is supposed to be pronounced. Not Japan like the country, but Japan. And it was a small town in Graham County on the South Shore. And that town, well, it also today is buried beneath this lake. By the early 1890s, along with several other roads having been present in the North Shore vicinity, there was a route extending along Alarka Creek west to Judson. I am going to assume that that route may have come to be subsumed by what is now known as Lower Alarka Road. And it does reach the lake, meaning it may well have been the road going to Judson. Today, it is more known as the road that leads to nearby communities like Round Hill. The late 19th century, though, it began to witness increasing settlement, as well as the earliest development of the logging industry. The extension of the railroad to Bryson City in 1884. That increased access to previously unavailable markets in the eastern part of the state and spurred the development of logging. Although there were no recorded logging operations in Swain County in 1880, by 1890, however, 12 such establishments were present. Most of the logging operations, well, they were present along a number of areas of the North Shore. Regardless, though, more substantial operations were organized in the early 1900s, including those of the Whiting Manufacturing Company. Furthermore, a post office had been opened in 1886 and operated until being discontinued in 1944. And yes, this is a photo of that very post office. And a post office, it was certainly needed as Judson began to grow with the arrival of the logging industry. Earlier operations in the area by the Buchanan Lumber Company, they were centered on Panther Creek, some distance to the west. That probably did not greatly affect Judson itself. Whiting, however, they changed all that. It was a Philadelphia based firm owned by brothers Frank R. and William S. Whiting, and it ended up being based in Judson. The Whitings. They had entered the lumber business in the 1890s and organized the Whiting Manufacturing Company in 1903. Let me now turn your attention to a 1980 edition of the American Lumberman. And in it says the following. The Buchanan Lumber Company had this mill on Panther Creek, located on what is known as the Murphy Branch of the Southern Railway, about 7 miles from Judson. Prior to the taking over of the Buchanan Lumber Company's stock by the Misters Whiting, that concern bought the property of the Thompson Canby Lumber Company. And it secured, through that purchase, 14,000 acres of timberland and two small circular mills. Since the Whiting brothers bought the Buchanan Lumber Company in Graham County, they have succeeded in adding to its holdings about 1,500 acres of very fine timberland, estimated to contain approximately 100 million feet. It is a fine, even growth of timber. The trees are large and tall, growing in the valleys or on the hillsides, as straight as ship masts. The average tree will produce about 4.5 16-foot logs, and the cut from each acre of land is probably in excess of 7,000 feet. The sawmill on Panther Creek is a 7-foot Clark Band Mill, Prescott Carriage, with steam set works. The company now has under consideration the advisability of putting in 2 or more modern dry kilns, and these will probably be installed at a very early date. A dam has been thrown across Panther Creek at the mill, and a very convenient and commodious log pond secured in this way. It provides storage room for about 1,000,000 feet of logs. And this supply enables the company to keep its mill going, should there be a temporary breakdown out in the woods. Oh, and by the way, this photo here, it is said to show a bunch of logs floating on, I guess, that very pond. The company owns the entire mill and town site, and it has erected for its employees suitable homes, which are lent at a moderate rental. The company also operates a commissary, shown here in the far background, which carries a $5,000 stock and does annually about $50,000 worth of business. The stock, it consists of general merchandise, such as is required to meet the needs of the workers. The yard has been divided up, the stock carried ranging from 4,000,000 to 4,750,000 feet. This stock covers the entire product of the mill, including oak, poplar, chestnut, basswood, hemlock, birch, buckeye, ash, and beech. The work at Panther Creek, both at the mill and in the woods, is under the supervision of W.R. Johnston, and the company gives employment to about 125 men. 125 men. What about women? Did they not work in the logging industry? Inquiring minds want to know. Anyhow, the story goes on to relate that about 4,000 acres of the 15,000 acres in the Judson vicinity had been cut over. The Whitings, they had just purchased another 14,497 acres in the Snowbird area of Graham and Cherokee counties, adding considerably to their holdings. This photo here is not of the Panther Creek mill, but rather the hardwood flooring mill at Judson. You see, in the early 1910s, the Whiting Company began construction of a double band mill, a planing mill, and dry kilns at Judson, and it had plans there to employ at least 400 men. Whiting extended narrow gauge rail lines up many of the drainages along the Nantahala and Little Tennessee rivers. These went on to include Panther Creek, Fox Branch, and Welch Cove. Whiting typically skidded logs to the railroad using horses or ox teams, where they were transferred onto cars and taken to the band mill at Judson. The company also built a depot just below Judson, for which I have no photo of, unfortunately, aptly named Whiting. In a 1912 description of their passenger rail stops, Southern Railway referred to the Whiting Depot in Judson as containing important and rapidly developing lumber plants, mentioned that the nearby forests have scarcely been touched, and would develop the areas as a populous and important part of Swain County. The firm eventually logged much of eastern Graham County, but by 1928 had ceased operations in that area. So, this photo here, it shows the interior of the Whiting Mill at Judson. It shows end matching machines used in the production of flooring. And then there's this photo, another interior shot showing an array of flooring and surfacing machines used in the production of high-grade oak flooring. Reportedly, a 1929 map was made shortly after Whiting left the area. It is reported to show 25 residences, primarily on the east side of the river, and these appeared along with Baptist and Methodist Episcopal churches, a school, a post office, 4 stores, and both freight and passenger depots. Now, I have not been able to locate that map, but do you know what I do have? Oh, yes, that's right. Another map. Well, I've got a couple, but this here, it is the 1936 planimetric map that shows slightly fewer structures within 1/2 mile of the town's center. Reportedly, there was this former resident who described 1943 era Judson in this way. It had a sawmill and 4 stores on the east side of the river. A post office, garage, mill, store, and barber shop was on the west. And the Judson Elementary School? Well, it was on a hill above the depot, on the west side of the river, in a former hotel building dating to the Whiting era. Now, let me turn your attention to this map, the 1943 Tennessee Valley Authority land acquisition map, and it indicates that many of the town lots in Judson had been purchased by Nantahala Power and Light since 1929, and that several no longer held structures. The town, however, it did retain a sense of community. Reportedly, a Tennessee Valley Authority researcher, Arnold Hyde, went on to praise the residents of Judson and also of nearby Almond for their attempts to keep the community spirit alive and for showing the initiative to build small hydroelectric plants. Judson in 1943 has been described as a community of about 600 people. And that figure, it compares well with the recorded population of nearby Almond in 1940. And both figures, they clearly include population from the surrounding countryside. Tennessee Valley Authority records further suggest that Judson and Almond supported 143 families in 1940. And now, this here is a photo of Vaughn and Victoria White, who owned this home, once located at Judson, not far from the mouth of Alarka Creek. And now, let me turn your attention to Fish Trap Branch, a tributary located not far at all from the Judson area. Reportedly, at least one fish trap, likely of Native American origin, is historically known to have been present at some point near this location, hence the name Fish Trap Branch. Well, Fish Trap Branch, it was also home to the LaQuire family. In fact, Jake LaQuire, the older man pictured in this photo, built this very house about 1 mile from the Little Tennessee River up Fish Trap Branch. And then we have this, a photo of men building a brick wall in town. Why Judson needed a brick wall is anyone's guess, but here it is being built. And today, likely, it sits somewhere beneath this here Fontana Lake. And finally, the construction of Fontana Dam. It was a tremendous effort. It was described by one carpenter as one big hell of a big job of work. Thousands of workers were employed on the project, with reportedly some 89 residents of Almond and Judson. And then Judson, it became nothing more than a part of history, because today it remains lie beneath the lake right here, likely not all that far from the mouth of Alarka Creek.